So hello there and welcome to a brand new episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast. My name is Adam Burns. I'm one of your hosts for this episode, and joining me once again, my co-host, Mr. Courtney I. Courtney, how are you doing so far? It's been 4 days at the time of recording this since the end of the Formula One season. Are you getting withdrawal symptoms already?
Yeah, it already feels like forever. But at least we've got Christmas to distract us, and before you know it, it'll be pre-season. I hope everyone's doing well, and I'm looking forward to doing another episode, Adam.
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed some sort of isms, if you like, or certain things that I've done following the end of the F1 season. Most notably, when I open and close my blinds, it reminds me of DRS. Or
Jesus.
following people, well, not following obviously too close to social distancing when you're walking around, try and get a toe off of them. And my personal favorite, when you turn the lights off before leaving your house, saying it's lights out and away we go. So
I've just realised something. I think Boris has missed a really important point when it comes to social distancing.
The
most important one. You need to stay out of DRS range to not catch COVID from people in indoor areas.
See, this is it now, because you've got to stay within a second of the guy in front in order to get that DRS, and you obviously want to get that toe off of them, and that's important, aerodynamics, but obviously you've got to remain social distancing. So yeah, Boris, absolutely, mate, you've got to get on that podium next time I say, look.
That's why the infection rates have gone up.
People DRS is disabled until further notice. But
we're such nerds. We're so nerdy.
I don't think we've been nerdy enough on this podcast. That's something we need to introduce a bit more with this Formula One ism stuff. I think we're too serious. So
maybe.
But let us know, guys, obviously. But anyway, obviously, the reason why we're doing this particular episode before Christmas, of course, is now that the 2020 season is done, it's time for us to basically give our own little review, the DNF1 review for the 2020 season, and otherwise been a brilliant season with all of the obstacles that everyone has had to face, as we mentioned in the last episode. And of course, a commendable effort from everybody involved in allowing us to have a pretty successful season, and one of the more memorable ones with some of the circuits that we've been into. But of course, there have been some great moments, and equally there have been some moments, particularly from some drivers and teams, that have been less than incredible. And of course, that's what we're going to be talking about today. So first things first, let's have a little brief mention of one Yuki Sonoda, who AlphaTauri have now confirmed that Yuki Sonoda will be joining the team from 2021. I mean, Courtney, it's pretty much been the worst kept secret in Formula One over the last 6 months or so, since he had that first seat fitting after the Imola race and, of course, that private test. How do you feel about that news for Yuki Sonoda? Do you feel that this is well deserved for him? And what impact do you feel that he will have in Formula One?
Well, given how he got on in Formula 2, he got Rookie of the Season. So he's done well there. He's obviously got good connections with Honda. He's gonna, from a marketing perspective, he's gonna be great for Formula One because the Japanese do love Formula One. So for them to have an idol, that would be another great element to the sport going into next season. He just needs to understand that Formula One is a very tough environment, and you'll be judged after a matter of races. So I have faith in him, but it just when you're a rookie and it's such a judging environment, he doesn't have much ground for error. So I hope he does well, because, as I say, with the whole Japanese element coming into, I think it'd be a great element. So I personally hope he does really well.
Absolutely agree. I probably can't really add much to that. I won a few races this season, did very, very well. Was arguably the informed driver towards the end of the season, alongside the likes of Mick Schumacher and Callum Ilott. If there were more races, he might have been able to catch them. And as you said, yeah, Rookie of the Year, very impressive. And of course, that Honda element cannot be understated, although it's fair to point out that he's not in Formula One next season purely because of that. He certainly has shown his mettle and got there on merit. So congratulations to Yuki, and I look forward to seeing him on the grid next season. Another driver born after the year 2000. So yeah, I think he will be the youngest driver on the grid next season, Yuki Sonoda. So that will be interesting to keep an eye on and see how he gets on. But yeah, so with that confirmed, that now leaves, technically speaking, 2 seats to confirm, one at Mercedes, although we expect Lewis Hamilton to have that all wrapped up by this year, if not in January at the latest. But the other seat at Red Bull, now, rumours have been circulating this week that a possible announcement for that second Red Bull seat alongside Max Verstappen will be confirmed either this week or early next week. And some of the rumors have been flying around suggesting that Sergio Perez may actually get the nod and get the call up, with Alex Albon being demoted as reserve driver. If that is the case, Courtney, I mean, what a fantastic piece of news. In terms of Sergio Perez, of course, we don't belittle Albon in this case. We thought it was important for Alex Albon to be in Formula One, and at least this way he will have an avenue back in for 2022, if it is indeed true. I mean, if this does happen, Courtney, how would you feel about this? Do you feel it'll be well-deserved for Perez?
It'd be great news for the pair of us. I think we've been beating the proverbial Sergio Perez drum repeatedly through most of the season. It'd be great for him. I think it's probably the best solution for Red Bull. You know, given that Sonoda's come along, it'd be really harsh to drop Albon out altogether, because the guy does have talent. He's just really struggled the way Gasly did. It's something they need to look into at Red Bull, but it's definitely the best solution, because with Perez being slightly old, he's 30, 31 now, I believe. Albon's got a lot more years ahead of him. And, you know, we've said it before, it's really difficult to get back into Formula One once you drop out. You really have to keep on the pace. So if this is true, I hope it is. I think apart from Albon to an extent, everyone's a winner here. And I'm sure many of the fans will be agreeing with it, because Perez has been one of the best drivers this season, without a doubt.
Absolutely, yeah. Couldn't agree more. And some standout performances from Sergio Perez, particularly in the latter half of this season, which has kind of left Red Bull, in my mind, with no decision to make. I feel it's blatantly obvious that Sergio Perez should be given the opportunity. I feel like if you lose him now, not only will it be a devastating loss to Formula One, but also to Red Bull as well, in terms of who they can put alongside Max Verstappen. We don't feel that it would be an easy fit. Of course, there will be challenges that Perez will have to face with arguably the toughest teammate to race against in Formula One, even including Lewis Hamilton in that debate as well. But we both feel that Perez is definitely the best option for them going forward.
Absolutely.
So we'll have to wait and see. Of course, we're saying this now at recording. By the time that this episode's out, we may get an announcement. So, but
that's what usually happens.
It does.
That's what usually happens.
Does. We usually, just as it happens, and then I'm literally messaging Courtney saying, "Shit, we really should have waited another day." But nevertheless, we will discuss that in more detail in the next episode, if, of course, we get that confirmation indeed. So, obviously, the basis of this episode, we're going to be doing a review of the 2020 season. Now, we're going to focus on a few things in particular. We're going to talk about who we felt were our team of the season, in particular, a memorable moment or our most memorable moment of the season, our race of the season, and, of course, one or two drivers in particular we felt were a bit of a disappointment. And then we will go through our top 10. So let's start first things first. So we have our top 10s, Courtney. Obviously, we know roughly what they're going to be. And the good thing is we don't agree on a lot of the actual positioning of this, which is always encouraging. I think, as you would know, Courtney, on this podcast, you and I tend to agree on quite a lot of things, surprisingly.
Yeah.
It's
only we only tend to disagree when Mercedes and Ferrari are competing at the front. That's when we usually have our disagreements.
And
it's been easy this season.
Competitive rivalries always have their biases to them. Whichever way you look at it, you're always going to defend which side that you're on more often than not. But it's always good to see some contrasting opinions. You know, synergies are great, but in this case, it's always a good thing to have a debate. In particular, I think two drivers that did not make our list that I think is worth talking about, Sebastian Vettel being one of them. And, you know, Sebastian Vettel's had his ups and downs in his Ferrari career this season in particular, ever since that announcement was made that Carlos Sainz would be getting the seat and Sebastian Vettel would have to look for a different team in Formula One. The season has really been a difficult one for Seb. You know, he's had some races where he's showcased the old brilliance in him, most notably in Spain, but also at the Turkish Grand Prix in particular, where he got that one and only podium of the season. But otherwise, Seb has really struggled to extract the performance out of a car, which isn't very good to start with. But even worse was that it was a car that very much did not complement Seb's driving style at all in comparison to his teammate.
Yeah, I think the emergence of Charles Leclerc what really was the undoing of Seb, because It's funny. Me and you had these conversation long before the podcast started when Charles joined, and I remember we discussed, will Ferrari design cars continue to suit Seb rather than suit Charles? But it seems as time's gone by, they've seen Charles as the up and coming superstar. Rightly so. I think he's going to be one of the best drivers of his generation, and they've started to. Definitely, the design concepts definitely went towards Charles, and with Seb, it was almost like the milk had gone stale for him, and it was time. It was time for him to move on, and that's why going into his next season at Aston Martin, I'm going to consider him a write off there. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because I feel that team, with the biggest of respects to Stroll, on paper, Seb should have that team covered. So he might be able to build a team around him again. And that's why he was so successful at Red Bull, because he was able to do that. He wasn't able to do that at Ferrari once Kimi left and Charles took over.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And, for years, Ferrari designed cars that did complement Sebastian Vettel's style. In a weird way, it probably was owed a lot to the input that Kimi Raikkonen in particular put in as a teammate. But of course, following Kimi's departure, Ferrari never really were able to get on top of the car in terms of complementing both of their drivers. And even this year, they haven't really done so either, even though you mentioned, Courtney, that they tried to design it perhaps with Charles as a preferable option in terms of who to design it around. They never really complemented his style either. He had to drive around the shortcomings of the car and able to extract the performance he did. And he just did an incredible job at that, whereas Seb really struggled. And I think next year's car at Ferrari, a lot more focus is going to be on the rear of the car in terms of stability, which will, of course, improve the front end as well, which would probably suit Seb a bit better. But hopefully we'll see more of the old Seb at Aston Martin. I certainly do hope that is the case, but we'll have to wait and see how that goes next season. Another driver in particular, I think, was a bit of a disappointment this season, Alex Albon. We already mentioned Alex. Bear in mind, neither of these guys are in our top 10, just as a reminder. That's why we're mentioning them now. But, Alex is a really funny one because Alex really showcased his qualities and what he can offer the Red Bull team at the last possible moment in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix with that 4th place finish. It was a good performance, not a bad one in qualifying, although we did get out qualified by Lando Norris in the McLaren. And he got ahead of him. The safety car came out. He drove a fairly solid race and he was on the tail of Lewis Hamilton and Bottas in Mercedes as a rear gunner to his teammate. But I think it's probably right to say that you can't really judge a driver on one very, very strong performance. And this was probably the strongest performance he put in, even more stronger than the 2 podiums he'd got in Mugello and Bahrain, where, in fairness, they were probably both more inherited than earned, with the utmost respect to Alex, because he had put in performances in other races where equally was taken away from him. So, it all balances out. But you can't really judge him on one great performance. If you tried to flip it and say Alex Albon was fantastic all season, and then in Abu Dhabi he had the worst race imaginable, you wouldn't sack him for that one race. Unless he did something really stupid, obviously, but you wouldn't sack him off of one bad performance. And in the same way, you have to kind of treat him on the same level when he puts in one fantastic performance, or the performance that Red Bull expect of him. You can't say, oh, well, you showed us there that, by that logic, we can ignore the other 16 races. You can't do that. What are your thoughts on Alex Albon this season, Courtney? Were you disappointed with his performances? A lot of it isn't always down to just the driver, but by and large, the margin to Verstappen was proven to be too great. And the worst part was it didn't look like it was getting better as the season went on. If anything, the gap was getting wider.
Yeah, I've already said it earlier in the episode. He just reminded me a lot of Gasly when he was at Red Bull. We all know how supremely talented Max is, but Red Bull certainly seemed to be the team that put the emphasis on the number one driver, and it's always been the case. You look back when Seb was there, and it must be soul crushing. That's why Daniel Ricciardo left. He left the team that was challenging for podiums and wins and took a step down in order to make a name for himself, because that's how it is. As good as Max is, it seems that number 2 seat seems to be a little bit of a soul crusher, because we've seen it happen with Gasly, we've seen it happen with Albon, and I hope it doesn't happen to Perez. I have our hopes for Perez, But it just seems that Albon was Gasly Mark II, and hopefully a little bit of time away from that environment might do him a lot of good.
Yeah, I think so too. I don't think we've seen the best of Alex Albon. I certainly don't believe we've seen the last of Alex Albon, if indeed Sergio Perez does get that seat at Red Bull for next season. And this experience will make Alex a better driver. It's not been the easiest of experiences to sort of get into, but it's certainly an opportunity that was very much thrusted upon him after his impressive spell in the Toro Rosso. And as you mentioned, Pierre Gasly in the same boat, he's come back a much better driver. And whilst Gasly's future at Red Bull seems pretty much slim, if not impossible to imagine, he will be better set up to join a team in the future outside the Red Bull program. Whereas Alex Albon, I believe Red Bull will definitely be keeping an eye on him and hoping he might get that opportunity to drive for them again, if, of course, he doesn't get it next season. So, let's move on to a few other key moments of the season. So, Courtney, I'm going to press you for a few questions before I do our top 10. So, who was your team of the season?
Oh, easy for me, Mercedes. Absolutely fantastic. I don't know where they keep on finding ways to break the ceiling. But they continue to. Like after 2014, 2015, I thought, no way, they can't keep on doing this. And then they got the challenge from Ferrari in 2017, 2018. But this season, they just found a way to absolutely obliterate the field the way they did in 2014. Now, you have a look back on this season, they're probably beaten, even that's debatable, of raw pace once, and that was at Abu Dhabi. You know, I only look at 2014 where they only lost races because they tripped over themselves or had reliability issues. That's probably the only season where I'd say Mercedes was stronger than this season. I just think what they've done is absolutely incredible, and I couldn't think of any other team to give this title to.
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to kind of overlook the achievements of a team like Mercedes this season when they've been so dominant and probably not as emphatically dominant as they have been this season in all of that time. So it's very easy to understate those achievements. But I think I agree with you absolutely, Courtney, that Mercedes, I wanted to give it to another team, perhaps like a McLaren, for example, who clinched third in the constructors, but it would be doing a disservice to Mercedes and all of the incredible work that they do. As you mentioned, reinventing limits, pushing that ceiling or breaking the ceiling, if you like. They are almost the Goku, if you like, of Formula One. They're just constantly smashing that ceiling. And if you are Dragon Ball Z fan, I hope you get that reference. If you're not,
Ferrari must be Vegeta.
No, I think Ferrari is probably Yamcha at this point, but
oh God.
kind of reminding everyone of their greatness. And it's like, you know,
back to George.
Yes, so let's move on. The moment of the season, Courtney. I mean, we talked about the great team, but what was the moment of the season in your mind? What was your favourite moment?
Oh, so I was going to go with Turkey, given the circumstances of the race and what happened, but I can't look any further than Monza. You know, chaotic, and what a brilliant moment a human moment for Pierre Gasly. For me, that's everything. That race is everything that Formula One should be. And I couldn't think of any better moment than Pierre Gasly winning at Monza.
Yeah, absolutely beautiful. And again, I do agree. I mean, I did say this last week's episode, actually. I mentioned this, but for all the right reasons, a beautiful human moment. And we were talking about a guy that lost his seat at Red Bull after a very difficult period, which was meant to be probably the best year of his life at the time. But in that time, he lost his Red Bull seat, and at the same weekend also lost his best friend, Antoine Hubert, who arguably would have probably been Formula One by now, maybe next season if he was still around. So it would have been an incredibly difficult time for Pierre to sort of reinvent himself, come back from the brink of being out of Formula One, not necessarily just out of his seat at Red Bull with no way back, to come to a race like Monza with all the pressures and that he faced, being put in that position, being chased down, to only see him being able to finish and complete that victory. And it was an incredible moment. As I said, the only injustice of that moment was that he wasn't able to celebrate in front of the Tifosi, which would have absolutely welcomed him warmly, despite the fact that Ferrari had a pretty dismal weekend with a double retirement. Anyway, it was an incredible moment in sport. It's one of those moments in sports where you remember for as long as you live. As a fan, no matter, we see other sports have moments like this, and it's a real human underdog moment that everyone can just come together and just celebrate the victory. It was absolutely incredible, a very touching moment, and
Yeah, it was. It was the moment that defined it all was when he sat on the podium after everyone had left, and he just sat there reflecting on exactly what happened. And that's what being a professional sportsman is all about. You dream of moments like that, and that really captivated Formula One, and it was a great advertisement for the sport overall.
Yeah, absolutely right. And it's like Seb Vettel said after the Indian Grand Prix in 2013, after he won his 4th World Championship, is you have to embrace and enjoy those moments because you don't know when they're going to happen again. And obviously in Seb's case, he hasn't won a World Championship since. So, it's a weird poetic feeling towards that. But yeah, absolutely incredible moment. Not just F1, but in sport in general. I'm going to push you before we do our top 10. What was your race of the season? Let's see if we can go free for free.
Race of the season, I'm going to have to look at Turkey.
Yeah.
Chaotic. That race really did, for me, show the who's the best, because those who didn't watch the race, it wasn't only wet. They were basically skating on grease for 2 to 2 hours flat, and it was just incredible. And and for Lewis, Mercedes weren't the fastest. They really struggled in those conditions, and they just found a way. Particularly Lewis just found a way to absolutely obliterate the field. Somehow, like turning those tires into the perfect compound. It was just brilliant to watch, and he sealed his 7th World Championship. And again, just the emotional moment and everything. The race was brilliant. But please, people, do tell us your moments, because if I've forgotten any races, please highlight them, because it'd be nice to be reminded, because there's been so many great moments this season. It'd be so easy just to go, yeah, Monza and Turkey. There've been so many great races. So if we have forgotten any, please bring them up and we can reminisce together.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. I echo that exactly. And yeah, I agree with you, Courtney, on the Turkish Grand Prix. For all of the reasons you just mentioned already, I don't think there's much more. I think the Seb Vettel podium as well was also another nice moment for me personally, even though it came at the expense of Charles. But yeah, it was absolutely incredible Grand Prix. And you're right, it did highlight how good Lewis Hamilton was. And it particularly on a Sunday, there are very, very few opportunities where you see someone outdoing Lewis in those conditions. And it just highlights his incredible might and stature in the sport. But yeah, guys, as Courtney mentioned, let us know your team of the season, your favorite moment of the season, and also your favorite Grand Prix of the season. Put that in the comment section as well. And as Courtney mentioned, we can reminisce with those together in the future episodes coming up. So let's go to our top 10, the main reason for this episode of this podcast. And Courtney, as I said already, you and I don't necessarily agree on this list in where all our places are. It'll be interesting to see if we have similar names on this list, but I'm going to push you for who you thought was 10th on your list. Okay. So without further ado, you have the floor.
Okay, no pressure. I'm going to go with number 10, Kimi Raikkonen. The man's in his 40s now, and he's still delivering very well, given the package that he has. They're probably down towards probably the 3rd worst team on the grid, and Kimi found a way to get some results that he had no right to achieve. And it just comes to show that the lifespan of a Formula One driver is certainly much longer than one of a football player, for example. But Kimi's not just, people sometimes forget that Kimi's not just a meme that says funny things. He's supremely talented, and we haven't really seen. I personally believe that Kimi was at the best. The best raw talented Kimi was probably his years at McLaren. But during this time at Alfa Romeo, maybe there isn't as much exposure. Just how he likes it. He doesn't like doing too much media work. He's in a comfort zone. And he's like the man's in his 40s, and he's driving brilliantly. So that's why I had to put Kimi in my top 10.
Yeah, the only F1 driver that was born in the 1970s on the grid at this point in time. Definitely makes you feel old when you reminisce like that. But yeah, I mean, I personally didn't include Kimi Raikkonen on this top 10 list. I think he just missed out. There were a lot of good performances from Kimi, but as I said, the difficulties that came with that car, I just felt it was a very hard case compared to some of the drivers in the top 10. I mean, usually when I do these top 10s, I have a hard time particularly towards the latter end, on which drivers miss out and which drivers scrape in. This year, I'll be honest with you, I don't think I had such a problem. I did have a problem as you go up the list in terms of some of the drivers and where they were, but in terms of finding the top 10, I didn't have that many difficulties. But Kimi, definitely one of the guys I thought was very, very close to making it, but not for me.
Who's your number 10 then, mate?
So 10th place for me, I went with Lando Norris.
Okay.
Yeah, Lando, he had a very solid second season in Formula One. I think it's fair to say, the great podium in the Austrian Grand Prix, very well deserved, of course, benefiting from that time penalty Lewis Hamilton picked up after that collision with Alex Albon. The Scenario 7 moment as well, the first of two that he had in the Styrian Grand Prix as well, when he was hunting down Sergio Perez and passed him at the final corner. Lando, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, I don't mean this as a criticism, but I think Lando has shown, if you were to put on a hierarchy all of the drivers, number one drivers in each team and number two drivers in each team, if you were to place one or the other, I think Lando has proven this season probably to be the best number two driver on the grid. And the reason why I say that is because I think Carlos Sainz is ahead of him at this point in time. Lando's got immense potential, but I think we have to be realistic. I think even though his pace in qualifying has been brilliant, Carlos on the Sundays has proven to be better than Lando in terms of the all-round package at this point in time. But as I said, Lando has time to improve on that. So that's why I consider him to be the best number two in F1. Great quali pace. Beat Carlos this season again, 9-8. So you beat him by one once again. And that's certainly no mean feat because Carlos is a great qualifier himself. A regular driver, making that shock appearance towards the front end of the grid. Got on the second row in Abu Dhabi, did a few similar performances this season. He's made a step forward in terms of his raw pace and tyre management. That's been a key thing for Lando because I think last season where his qualifying pace was good, he did tend to struggle in managing the tyres. And obviously that transcended into his race pace, sort of faltering at the key moments, obviously when strategy was going to take initiative in this case. I would say probably one of the criticisms for Lando this season is that he's been a bit too polite in his wheel-to-wheel battles. I feel, and particularly in the early stages of the race, I feel like Lando, if he's going to make that step forward, needs to be a bit more aggressive and get those shoulders out in the same way that Charles Leclerc was perhaps a bit too polite in his first season at Ferrari, at least in the earlier stages. And then he started to be a bit more aggressive. As I mentioned, Lando on the opening lap did tend to struggle a bit more than some of his rivals did. And that can obviously result in a more difficult race than you would like. Ideally, you want to be making up more places. I think it'll be very interesting to see how Lando stacks up with against Daniel Ricciardo next season.
Yeah.
That's going to be a great battle to see. I'm really looking forward to that. But in Daniel, he's got a guy similar to Carlos who's shown great form, very reliable, very quick. Probably a bit better than Carlos Sainz at this point in time in their respective careers. So that next step for Lando will have to be to try and get more Sunday performances out of him in the same way that he has done in qualifying. But otherwise, been a very good season for Lando. So it was a hard list. I don't want to knock him because I'm putting him 10th, but when you see some of the other names on the list, I think you'll probably agree why I put Lando 10th in particular. But Courtney, let's go to you for your 9th place driver for this season. Who did you have in 9?
So if we stick with McLaren, I did put Carlos Sainz in 9th. He did have a very solid season. You don't want to knock the guy too much, but I put him there partly because the whole story of Lando, which will go later on in the list, but also he did make a couple of errors, particularly in Russia, and that's why I put him low down my list. He would have been higher up, and we've already said about not judging people over particular moments, but that was the one moment for me that knocked him down, probably just by one place, because it was, even by his own account, it was a stupid thing to do. And when you're driving at a team like as big a Ferrari next season, you can't be doing that. But overall, he did have a great season. But given the drivers that are above him, it's very close for me between him and Lando. But I've put Lando above Sainz because of the development of Lando. So I just think with Sainz, just one or two mistakes put him low down in my list.
Yeah, see, I had Carlos a little bit higher. I mean, obviously, I perhaps have a different account of it, and I don't know if this is the Ferrari in me coming out in how I saw signs this season, because I was very interested in how he did. But I thought he had a very good season. You mentioned the Russia moment. That was such a funny moment. The way that he tried to not shortcut, but try and go a bit faster through that escape area that they had to go round, and he absolutely messed it up in the wall. And as soon as I saw that, all I could hear in my head was, you know, that meme where someone makes a mistake and it goes, it was at this moment where he knew he fucked up.
Yeah, yeah,
That
oh yeah, he
literally,
definitely did.
I'll have to try and do that just for the benefit of those of you that hadn't seen it. But it's so funny. But no, fair enough. So I went with Valtteri Bottas in ninth place for this season. So a lot of people will hear that and probably think, oh, Bottas in your top 10, like he was terrible this
Yeah,
season. I think,
it wasn't in mine.
oh, really? Oh, right.
It wasn't in mine.
Fair enough. But I don't think Valtteri had a bad season. It's so hard to measure Valtteri's performances when you've got the barometer of trying to compete with Lewis Hamilton, who now is statistically the greatest driver of all time. And as credible as Lewis has been, I mean, he was definitely struggling to match Lewis in terms of outright pace on a Sunday. I think that was the big issue. People tend to focus too much on qualifying, but 11-5, all right, it's a landslide in Lewis's favour, but that's not too bad considering we're talking about the greatest qualifier of all time as well. You know, so I don't think Valtteri's season was too bad. He struggled with tyre management on a Sunday. I think that was his biggest weakness to Lewis. The race in Portimao, I think, is a great example where Valtteri looked good on a surface that was very difficult to drive on. The cars were moving about, and in the early stages, Lewis was struggling. But then as the latter phases of the races were unfolding, Valtteri's tyre management, by contrast to Lewis's, was not very good. And Lewis took full advantage, took the lead, and obviously went on to win that race, breaking Schumacher's record in the process. It's not an easy comparison Valtteri has to face. I would say if you've got your top drivers in, let's say, Hamilton, Verstappen, Leclerc, if we're just picking names out of our A-star drivers, Valtteri, in my mind, would be in that next echelon, if you like, the A or the B plus drivers. And I think if you stuck Valtteri in, say, a Racing Point, he might have been along the lines of as good as what Sergio Perez did this season, or perhaps in that sort of ballpark. So that's something that he really does need to work on, Bottas, next season. It's going to be really hard. There've been some races where he was very good. Austria, Imola, Abu Dhabi. The Sakir race did not help his reputation. I think it's fair to say.
So that's why lifting out my top 10. I personally thought that, okay, Lewis has won the championship, and particularly after Lewis was out with COVID as well. I thought, right, this is going to be an opportunity for Bottas to kind of rebuild his reputation and go into next season with some kind of positive momentum. But he was flat, to say the least, and that's why he was outside of my top 10.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. I would say, like I said, the Sakir race, I think, definitely dented his reputation. It was a lose-lose situation for Bottas. If he'd have won that race comfortably, people would have said, well, he's more experienced in that car. George Russell's still a raw talent. There's still stuff to work with. There was never going to be a benefit unless he absolutely trounced George. And the fact that he didn't, you could have watched that race and not known the context of what happened during the week, seen a different helmet and thought, oh, Lewis Hamilton's wearing a different colored helmet this week. And then you realize, oh, hold on, that's George Russell, driving like that. So yeah, that didn't help. The Turkish Grand Prix was also a bit of a nightmare for Valtteri, but then I think in context, he had a difficult race and had damage to the car, and probably, still disappointed over Lewis winning a world championship again at his expense. It was difficult for him. So a big battle for Bottas next season. I think it's going to be critical, but I put him ninth. I gave him the benefit of the doubt and thought, otherwise he didn't do too bad. It was just because he's compared to Lewis, and in this case, George, in this one occasion, it made it very difficult for him to look like he was doing amazingly well. So let's move into number 8 on your list, Courtney. Who did you have for number 8?
So yeah, I'll put Lando just above Sainz. I didn't put him there purely on pace. I've put him there because of the development that he's had since last season. Yeah, he had a lot more luck when it comes to reliability. But as you've already said, Adam, his time management, his race pace has improved so much. And towards the end of the season, like the qualifying in particular, was definitely a lot better. We've had these discussions in the past where I've kind of feared that Lando's exploits, shall we say, outside of Formula One, could affect his ability on the track. And this season, the step forward he's made has kind of quelled those fears. I think it's looking good for Lando. Next season is going to be very interesting to see how he gets on with Daniel, who's going to be a very strong teammate. But he's definitely made a big step forward this season, and I think he deserves a bit of credit for that. So that's why I put him above Sainz.
Fair enough. I went with George Russell in 8th place. Now, George is a really hard person to put in this list in terms of where do you measure him or where do you stack him up. I mean, to be honest, I had a bit of difficulty with 6, 7, 8 on my list. I felt that I could have swapped them in different areas. And even now that I think about it now, I could make an argument to swap them around in different order. But I went with George in 8th. It's been hard to judge George Russell this season and also last season when he was competing in his rookie season. He wasn't really competing with anyone else except for Robert Kubica. But it's hard to judge Russell against Latifi. He was constantly faster than him in qualifying. As I said, he was 16-0 against Latifi this season. Of course, the one exception in the Sakir when he was qualifying against Valtteri Bottas. And he's very much revelled as the team leader of this Williams team, hence why they've kept him on for another season, which is, an understatement at best. But, the qualifying performances, as we mentioned, has been immense. He was a regular in Q2. I think in more than half the races this season, he qualified for Q2 in a Williams, which was arguably the slowest car on the grid at most tracks. And the performance in particular for Mercedes at the Sakir Grand Prix was nothing short of incredible. As I said before, you'd be forgiven for thinking without context that you watched that race and saw, Lewis Hamilton's wearing a different coloured helmet this weekend. Judging by the performance, you would not have known without seeing the name or knowing the background of what happened in the week that George Russell was driving that car. I mean, George was sitting a bit higher in the car than Lewis was. He had to wear them smaller boots than probably preferred to make that work. But, it was an incredible performance from George, and it allowed people that weren't already aware that we were of how good George Russell actually is. And it was that sort of performance in particular. He should have won that race. I don't think there's any two ways about it. He should have won that race. It was very cruelly taken away from him by factors out of his control. That happens in Formula One, but I'm certainly no doubt in my mind that it will get opportunities again. As you mentioned, tyre management, we keep going back to this, but it's such a critical factor in modern day Formula One. That was something George struggled with last season, and in a way probably struggled with towards the early parts of this season. And the opening laps, they have been an issue for George, but his race performance in the second half of the season, excluding the Sakir race, just for Williams alone, have been very, very good. And in a weird way, it's kind of nice. We don't have to factor in that mistake he made at the Imola Grand Prix in terms of not getting his first championship points, because he should have done it then, but he's done it now, even though it won't mean much because it come in the Mercedes and that he probably would have rather have won. It's nice to know he's got that monkey off of his back, if you like. And, but yeah, I thought George did very well this season, definitely top 10, and I put him in 8th in my list. So let's move on to number 7.
That's perfect. That's perfect, Adam, because George was my number 7 choice.
Oh, have I given you nothing to mention on this one? Have I already done it all?
You kind of gone through it all, to be honest. But yeah, like it's so easy to judge him on that one race for Mercedes. You said he should have won. But the performances for Williams, particularly on Saturday, like, come on, putting that Williams. Now, Williams have made a step forward this season, but Williams are still so far behind, and to put that car in Q2 and the amount of times that he did, that guy has a big future in Formula One. I have no doubts. If he had more of a chance in the Mercedes and a better car, I have no doubts he'd have been higher up this list. But it's difficult to judge a driver that's in a car that's so uncompetitive. But that's why George he had to make the top 10. But I think it would have been higher. Yeah, definitely would have been higher if he was in a better car. Well,
the good news for Williams, as you mentioned, they've obviously made a move for Joss Capito. I believe I pronounced that right. Yeah, Joss Capito, who very successful guy. Obviously, the former director at VW, director of motorsport. He had successful spells in Sauber and McLaren as well. Definitely a guy that's going to be trying to get the most out of Williams going forward on this project with Doralton Capital. And obviously, Simon Roberts is going to stay on as team principal. So definitely good times ahead for Williams. And Russell will definitely be at the forefront of that charge for them as well. My 7th was, and this is really hard because I swapped literally about 5 minutes before we come on. I swapped these two around, but I've gone for Pierre Gasly in P7. Now, Gasly, the highlight this season for me, winning in Monza, great character responding after the setbacks that he had that we've already mentioned, outperforming that AlphaTauri on most occasions and completely obliterated Danny Kvyat as a teammate, perhaps with the exception towards the latter end of the season. Although AlphaTauri did make some changes to their car to make it more rear focused, which benefited Kvyat to the detriment of Gasly. And, he had some great performances this season, Gasly. As I said already, had difficult setbacks. He fell off it a bit in terms of pace towards the end of the season, as I mentioned already. But, I think Gasly had a brilliant season. I don't think there's too much that I can say, or, I hope I don't undersell it, but it wasn't just the focus on the one race at Monza where he won that Grand Prix, found himself in that position and drove brilliantly to see it home under the immense pressure he was under. But it was the cherry on top of an otherwise brilliant season for Pierre after what he had last season. And, he probably won't find himself in a Red Bull seat again, but it will definitely be a great advert for him to find a good seat in the team outside of Formula One. I'm still thinking perhaps Renault might be looking at him beyond 2022
definitely.
if Ocon doesn't do well next season. And, Ocon, I didn't put him in my list. A little cheeky spoiler there. I didn't put him in my top 10 list. He was another driver that was close, but, he got that podium in Abu Dhabi, but his better performances come towards the latter end of the season. I think he's definitely going to have to up his game against Fernando Alonso because his future could be in some level of doubt if Pierre Gasly has another similar season. So, well done to him. So that takes us now to our top 6. So, Courtney, who was number 6 in your illustrious list?
There's a reason why I laughed when you said Gasly, because you've done it again. Gasly's my number 6 driver. You've done it. You've gone through all the points. You've left me with scraps, Adam. You left me with scraps. But no, I think the main story for Gasly, spot on about Monza, but the main story is a turnaround for last season. Let's just think of this as human beings from a sheer human perspective. Last season, you've had an awful time at Red Bull. Your confidence has been knocked. You've lost one of your best friends, and for him to put in the level of performances it has this season, I'm so happy for the guy, so happy, and I just hope he continues with this because I reckon Renault could be a future, and if they develop the way they are with Alpine, they could really build a special project, and I hope Gasly gets a shot at being in a car that regularly challenges for races because what the guy's done in last year is brilliant. I'm sure other people enjoy me congratulating what he's done because I'm sure there have been stronger guys that have been knocked down and haven't recovered the way he has. So well done, Pierre. I just hope that he gets a chance to be more competitive in the future.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think there's more that we can say on it. We've pretty much said a lot on Gasly as it is, but next season will definitely be a big season for him in terms of advertising himself to other teams. I'm pretty certain AlphaTauri probably won't keep him on next season. They probably won't be allowed to after next season. We'll have to wait and see. But my number 6, you've already mentioned him, Courtney. As I said, this was tough, 6, 7, and 8, but I've given Carlos Sainz my number 6 spot. As you mentioned already, Carlos Sainz, there were a few moments this season where made some mistakes. Obviously, the Russian Grand Prix, the most notable of those. But I think overall, Carlos pretty much maximized the performances on Sunday in contrast to Saturday, where, he was slightly behind Lando on Saturday, as I mentioned already. Lando qualifying managed to do one better than him, and it was so close. This proved to be one of the closest inter-team battles all season, if not the closest. And Carlos was fantastic on the Sunday. He's a great performer on the opening lap. I think you can cast your mind back to the race at Portimao, where he had a great start, got through the traffic, and he managed to overtake both Mercedes and led the race temporarily. And Carlos in particular, other than that Russia blunder, he didn't really waste too many opportunities in the points. I mean, he probably could have got 25% more points this season than he did if it weren't for some reliability issues, most notably in Belgium when he was running very strong in that race, and then he had that reliability issue that cost him some big points. He will be very disappointed to miss out on victory in Monza. It was a race that you could argue that he and Lance Stroll probably felt they should have won, which was eventually won by Pierre Gasly. In Carlos Sainz's case, he just ran out of time. If he'd have pushed a bit sooner, or if he had a few more laps, he might have caught Gasly and passed him. And he still says, it still hurts a little bit thinking about that, how close he was to his first win. But it will be very, very interesting to see that what he can do at Ferrari. I think in a way, a lot of people underestimated Carlos. I certainly did at the start of the season when I learned that he was going to Ferrari. I wanted Ricciardo. I still maintain I think Ricciardo would have been the better option, but Ferrari probably underestimated him as well. I think they were probably happy to get a good driver that would, do well, but play a good number 2 role to Charles Leclerc. But I feel that Ferrari are going to get a lot more than that in Carlos Sainz. He's a very well-rounded driver. He's quick. He's got that great blend of youth and experience, like in the way that Verstappen does. And I think that's going to be a very fiery lineup for at Ferrari next season. So yeah, I think Carlos Sainz fantastic this season, and number 6 on my list. So we're now getting into the business end, Courtney. The
number 5.
So without further ado, I think this is at the point where our list might start to merge.
Perhaps, yeah.
Energy-wise. So let's see. Who have you got as number 4? Oh, unless you wanted to make a quick point.
No, number 5. I've got to say, so unlike the last couple of times, you've actually introduced my number 5 perfectly, and that is Carlos Sainz's future teammate, Charles Leclerc. Now, you'll see Adam's face when I say this. Ferrari have been absolutely awful. They've been, in terms of the size of the team, respectively, they've probably been the biggest underachievers. Okay. It could have been so easy for Charles, particularly given his age, to throw his toys out the pram and just have an average season. But some of the performances he's put in for, he had no right whatsoever to, particularly on the Saturday, to get some of those positions that he got. And even during a race, the car's been awful. But Charles could have got some really good race finishes if it wasn't for tactical mistakes made by the pit crews at Ferrari. He got some great results as it is, but it could have been even better if it wasn't for those errors. Yeah, and barring 1 or 2 sloppy errors that he's made, but most of the drivers have this season, I think he's had an exceptional season. And I'm a big believer in that. The performances that you put in when the car is weaker really sets you up really shows the driver that you are. And the moment you get a good car, it's going to put you in that position to have that confidence to go full attack. And this has been the season for me that has given me the encouragement that Max Verstappen is going to have a true rival once Lewis Hamilton retires, because I was genuinely worried that once Lewis goes, it's just going to be going from one guy dominating from year on end to Max Verstappen doing it. And Charles Leclerc in particular, and maybe perhaps George Russell, have given me some hope that there is going to be a competitive future for Formula One.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with a lot of that with Charles Leclerc. I actually put him a little bit higher on my list, so I won't get into him until I get there. But, shock Ferrari fan puts him high on the list. But no, it was brilliant season for Leclerc, all things considered. But we'll talk about him a bit more in a moment. And so I went with Daniel Ricciardo in 5th place. I would say, despite the fact that he didn't win any races this season, and in a Renault that would have been some achievement, I think this has been Daniel Ricciardo's best season in Formula One. Definitely the best since he left the Red Bull team in 2018. Since he's left them. The overall driving performances from Daniel has been exemplary. They've been fantastic. I mean, he's definitely elevated himself and raised his game to be the team leader at Renault, which is ironic given that he's leaving them for McLaren. His performances in qualifying, they were always good. At Red Bull, I thought they were excellent this season. A regular guy in the top 5 or 6 on the grid. Some brilliant results in the races, including podiums at the Eiffel Grand Prix in particular, and the Imola Grand Prix as well. Very much well deserved. And these were the first podiums that Renault had achieved in almost a decade. It wasn't until 2011 was the last time Renault had got a podium before that. So he's really, really overdue. And Daniel was able to deliver that in quite abundance. It will be very interesting, as I said already, to see how Daniel gets on at McLaren. A new teammate in Lando Norris, probably one that might give him more to think about than Esteban Ocon did. Ocon was good towards the tail end of the season, but overall, Daniel really had that Renault team, in his pocket behind him. And I don't think there's much more that you can say from the Honey Badger. He's definitely one of the most likable drivers on the grid. You know what you're going to get from Daniel. I wanted him at Ferrari at the time when the seat was available. And, I think he's going to do a fantastic job at McLaren. It'll be very interesting to see how that dynamic goes. But if Lando thought Carlos Sainz was a tough teammate, he's going to get a very tough teammate in Daniel Ricciardo. So definitely looking forward to seeing McLaren make that next step forward. And I think Daniel is the guy to take them in that next chapter in their journey. So, let's go to fourth. Courtney, who did you have in P4? And I feel like I've done it again, haven't I?
You've done it again. You've done it again. Adam Burns, you've done it again. Yeah,
that
Danny
ego
Rick,
of his. He's doing it again.
He's done it again. But yeah, fantastic season for Daniel. I think one point I'm gonna make, seeing as you've covered him pretty well yet again.
That's what. No, I won't do that.
I look at Daniel and what he's done for Renault, the way that I look at what Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris have done for McLaren. Very much one of the main reasons why you've seen a resurgence in a team that struggled in recent seasons. His performances have definitely put Renault back on the map. Definitely making other teams keep an eye on them. Definitely a team to look out for in the future. And he's definitely reinvigorated that team. These things don't happen by accident. And I'm really pleased that Daniel's had a chance to really prove himself. We mentioned it early on at Red Bull. They always have the golden boy at Red Bull, and other drivers don't get a chance to prove themselves. Daniel knew that. That's why he left. And yeah, this season he's really had the opportunity to showcase, and boy, has he done it. And he could build something really special at McLaren with Lando. I'm really excited about this. Everyone's saying, oh yeah, I'm really excited to see the jokes and all that. Yes, I am, but I'm more excited to see what they can do with this team. McLaren, I've always considered, will always have a place in my heart for many reasons, with Lewis being a British team, even with Ayrton Senna. And I really hope that with Daniel coming in, the Mercedes engine, got great people there like Zach Brown, new investment. The future's so exciting for McLaren, and I think he can really spearhead them becoming a great top team again.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard, that 2019 season for Ricciardo, because he sort of had to recover from the experiences at Red Bull with Max Verstappen as his teammate, and quickly shifted in Max's favour since he signed that contract a while ago. And, it took a while to recover, but I think 2020 we saw the best of Daniel Ricciardo again, and he really took it up to that next level. So it was brilliant to see, and it's definitely to McLaren's gain, whereas Renault, even though they're getting Alonso, might feel, damn, we are losing one hell of a driver in Daniel Ricciardo. So we'll have to wait and see how that transpires. So my fourth place was Sergio Perez. Now, this was really hard, because this was probably the hardest one, who I put fourth and who I put third. And I know, Courtney, I'm going to save you some. I'm not going to blout out everything on Sergio Perez, because I feel like I'm stealing the spotlight for all of the points you want to make. So it's like you're kind of, anyway. Perez, I think I've mentioned this to a few drivers, but I think more so than anyone else, Perez this season has been one of the most consistent and reliable point scorers in F1 in modern times, particularly this season. He's proved that in abundance this year. I mean, let's not forget, Sergio Perez missed 2 races because of COVID-19 at Silverstone, the F1 70th anniversary Grand Prix. He was still comfortably best of the rest this season, 4th place. Now, I know a lot of people argue that, well, the Racing Point was the 3rd fastest car most of the season, and if not the 2nd at certain races. Sergio Perez should be finishing in that sort of position in the championship. That's not a criticism. If you're criticizing a guy for delivering what is expected of him in a car, you can't criticize someone for that. That's like saying, well, you can't praise Lewis Hamilton for winning a world championship because he had the best car. Well, yeah.
People do, though.
People do, but I find it mad. Like, I don't know how you can do that. Absolutely mad. It's but I saw certain elements in Perez's driving this year that reminded me a lot of Alain Prost, that methodical approach where you could set the car up well, you're balanced, you don't panic when you get in difficult situations and you have to make up ground. I mean, the Sakir Grand Prix was a brilliant testament to Perez in terms of the improvements he's made in tyre management, the way that he carries himself more methodically, the hard work that he's put into his driving. And, to go from that first lap incident with Charles Leclerc, where it really ruined Perez's race, for lack of a better way of putting it, he was able to put on new tyres. He got the benefit of the first sort of safety car to help him out, but he drove through the field incredibly well. He passed literally everybody to the point where he found himself at the front, and then took one of the most incredible victories I've seen in Formula One from the back of the field.
And he deserved it as well.
Absolutely. It was no way inherited at all. He earned that. And after the week he had before, where he was cruelly robbed of a podium, I mean, this is a guy that's had to be faultless. And I can't think of a better way of putting it than saying, well, he pretty much was, comfortably best of the rest. People used to tag Perez as a poor qualifier and lazy. He upped his game on that big time, got some great qualifying performances. And on Sundays, Perez was as good as arguably anybody, if not better than almost everybody. So I think absolutely deserved. And I certainly hope, and of course, at the time of recording this, we may get confirmation of this in the next few days, but I certainly hope Perez will be on the grid next season. If for anything else, that performance in Sakir is the perfect advertisement as to why Sergio Perez should be on the grid next season.
Yeah, and that's why, Adam, Sergio Perez is my number 3 driver for the 2020 season. Yeah, said it at the beginning, we've been beating the Sergio Perez drum repeatedly for months and with good reason. He's definitely upped his game. He's gone from being a driver that was in that stigma, shall we say, of only being there for the money that he brings. Because I did think that at one point a few years ago, particularly after a torrid time at McLaren. But during his time at Force India, who then became Racing Point, slowly but surely built his own name with Formula One, slowly, surely built his reputation. And this season, he's just taking it to the next level. Yes, the car has helped to a degree, but that's Formula One for you. But he suffered from COVID. After COVID, he could have come back and just put in average performances. Particularly if he's struggling from the effects of it, but he didn't. He plugged away, got great results, and even after he thought his F1 career was finished, he carried on putting in brilliant performances, which probably has hopefully saved himself a seat in Formula One. And I'm just really pleased for him. We spoke about Gasly earlier on. I'm pleased for him that he's gone from a position where he thought he's going to be without a seat. And he's earned this. He's hopefully earned this position to be in Red Bull. And I just hope that the news is good in the coming days.
Certainly hope so. Yeah, couldn't agree more. So third place. So this is where it got difficult. As I said, this was the last difficult one I had. I went with Charles Leclerc. I don't think it's a biased opinion from a Ferrari fan to put Charles Leclerc in the top 3 this season. And it was very close with him at Perez. I was literally deciding one way or the other. As I said, about half an hour ago, I had Perez in my top 3, but then I thought, you know what? For the reasons why I'm going to mention, I think Leclerc deserves to be in the top 3. I mean, he's absolutely underlined his star quality from the 2019 season. And if anything, he's been even more impressive this season, even though he's not won any races. I mean, the first race of the season in Austria, in a car that was clearly nowhere near the upper echelons of the grid, and he was able to drag that to get a second place finish when all the chaos had ensued in front of him. He drove so well. And then, other performances in particular that were brilliant. In Silverstone as well, he got the other podium. His tyre management in that race was absolutely fantastic. And this is something, again, I keep going back to tyre management, but it's so critical in the modern era of Formula One. You cannot undervalue how important it is to have a driver that can be fast, but also manage their tyres. Some of the best drivers in the sport still struggle with that. And that is such a critical factor in these days of Formula One, where the tyres are not as durable as they used to be. And, this kind of hallmarked what was so good about Leclerc this season, because he was driving a car, as you mentioned already, Courtney, that was absolutely terrible. I mean, there were some races where they were lucky to get into Q2, let alone Q3. And there's some races where that car should not have been in Q3. And yet Charles Leclerc not only did that, but he ended up putting it on the front 2 rows of the grid. I mean, if you could think of one qualifying lap of any driver this season that would be the highlight, that lap at Sakir from Charles Leclerc, where he got 4th on the grid. For me, that would be the qualifying lap of the season. And on a ring road,
I'd argue with that.
Yeah, on a ring road like that as well, that's even more impressive for Ferrari. It was so good. Charles himself got out of the car with 5 minutes left of the session, said to his team, like, lads, I'm not going to do a better lap than that. No one's going to do a better lap than that in that car. I'm going off and doing my post-qualifying press after that. It was absolutely incredible from Charles. So, I can't really argue much more than that. And he always seemed to deliver the absolute maximum out of that Ferrari. And it just bodes well for him in the future that Ferrari really do have a driver that can really challenge for the big, big titles again and race wins on a weekly basis if they can provide him with that car. The only criticism I can give for Charles Leclerc was some of the over-aggressive mistakes in a few races. I mean, we mentioned the Styrian Grand Prix. You know, he'd had a great podium, and then the next race, he goes up the inside of Sebastian Vettel in turn 3 and not only takes himself out, but also his teammate. Also in Russia, when he had that collision with Lance Stroll, when he was a bit too aggressive. And, of course, the incident at the Sakir race where he almost took Perez out, took himself out, and caused Max Verstappen to have that crash as well. It's those elements of Charles's driving that I think he really needs to make sure that he eradicates. But the one good thing about Charles, I should say, is that I compared a lot of these incidents to how Max Verstappen used to have incidents in 2018. You know, but the difference between the two of them then and what Charles is doing now is Charles is very, very quick to own up to these mistakes. He very quickly acknowledges where he's made the error or that it was his fault, and he's done that every single time. And he's been
I am
very
stupid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he's been very critical of himself as well. You know, like he said in Baku when he made that mistake in qualifying when he should have won that race. And he's, as I said, he's been very quick to own up to these mistakes, take the blame, and make sure he doesn't make the same mistakes twice. And I know it might seem to some people that he is still doing that. I would argue that he is eradicating those errors and that these are newer things that he's doing. And if he can fix that last little bit to his driving, as an all-round driver, he has got exactly what it takes to be Ferrari's next world champion. If it does happen, Ferrari will have to provide him with that car. But as you said, Courtney, I definitely feel this season has highlighted the fact that if there were any doubts over to his true potential, he definitely is in that A-star category with Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen. And I sincerely hope, not just for Ferrari, but also for Formula One in general, that Charles Leclerc is given the tools to compete with Max Verstappen in the future generations. And if George Russell ends up Mercedes there as well, because I think Ferrari really do have an absolute gem on their hands. And it is, again, a brilliant performance from Leclerc. So to the final two on our list, no prizes for guessing who these two are going to be. But Courtney, I'm going to come to you first because I think these are the two we actually agreed on. On this list.
So Max Verstappen, very much the best of the rest, shall we say, because Mercedes were very much in a league of their own. And whenever Mercedes had any kind of struggles, whether it be engine power or strategic struggles, weather, Max was always there to pick up the pieces. You know, you look at Silverstone in particular, the second race, the 70th anniversary race, wasn't it called?
Yes. Yeah.
Where Mercedes struggled with the temperatures. And Max took the decision himself to say, you know what, this is going to be our only opportunity to beat the Mercedes. Let's do it. He showed some leadership in the team. And the guy is obviously supremely talented. It's clear to see. I think he's definitely going to be the next big thing in Formula One. And this season has probably given him the chance to show that. And he'll be open in the future, particularly even next year. It could be his first opportunity to win his first world, which could be the first of many world championships. He's definitely put himself in a good position. The only thing I would say with Max is still showing those moments of anger. It doesn't reflect well. You know, look at he's clashed with Stroll, and there's been a couple of incidents as well, and he's still showing those moments where he gets heated, and he can't afford to be doing that if he gets close to Lewis next year, he can't be doing that because Lewis is much more experienced and he'll take advantage of that. But overall, he's been great, and he's setting himself up to be a future world champion nicely.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. And I had him as number 2 on my list as well. I think it was a no-brainer with Max Verstappen. I mean, other than one race in Turkey when he comes 6th, where he probably could have won that race. Could have won, should have won, didn't. You know, he was a bit too over-eager, I suppose is the right way of putting it, on that move on Sergio Perez, which didn't pan out. It lost downforce, lost grip, and he ended up spinning the car. As I said, that was a race that got away from him. Probably one of the only races of the season where he really had the car and the ability to win this race on merit. And perhaps that level of expectation coming out of nowhere might have forced him to try and make that move. Whereas a calmer Lewis Hamilton was more methodical in his approach and ended up going on to win that race in an incredibly dominant fashion as it transpired. But looking at Max this season, the only real challenge to Mercedes, I think it's fair to say, this season. And in some ways, the only real challenge to Lewis Hamilton. With all respect to Valtteri Bottas, you could argue in a way that Max gave Lewis a bit more to think about than Valtteri did. In some cases, on several occasions, he was close enough to be an annoyance to them, or a threat to them, to the point where they had to really consider the strategy. I mean, you mentioned the F1 70th anniversary Grand Prix. That was my favorite piece of radio this season, other than Lando Norris singing about Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But yeah, the way he said, look, this is as close as we're going to be to the Mercedes. I'm not going to follow them like some sort of grandma. I love that, because Red Bull were telling him to back off to look after the tyres. And he said, no, we're going to get after these guys and put them under pressure, especially after the events that had transpired at the British Grand Prix the week before, where Valtteri had blown a tyre and fell off the podium and Lewis had to win the race on free tyres. It put that pressure on them. And by the time Mercedes tried to react to it, it was already too late. Max was good enough, quick enough, and more of a pestering them enough, I suppose, to get that win. And it really showcased the quality of him this season. Ultimately, that pace from the Red Bull proved to be a bit of a false dawn, as the season probably proved to be for them. I mean, we looked at pre-season testing. I picked Max to be world champion this season. I was wrong, clearly. But given the data that we saw in pre-season testing, we assumed that the gap between the two was going to be rather minimal, of maybe a tenth or two at most. And we felt Max had the ability to make up the difference, at least in qualifying, so put himself in a position where he could win more races than he did. And Red Bull really have to try and find a way, if they can, to give Max what he needs to challenge Lewis and Mercedes over the course of a season. They won at Abu Dhabi, which was probably performance-wise, probably their strongest in terms of car performance all season, given the caveats Mercedes faced with their MGUH problems, or MGUK problems, if you like, that restricted their pace. Could that prove to be another false dawn for next season? I don't know. Red Bull, in the past, have always been very strong towards the end of the season, perhaps because they prioritize development over the course of the season rather than try and get a head start. That has happened again this year. Will it be a detriment to them? I don't know. Probably not so much as previous seasons, because of the continuation of a lot of the regulations. They're probably going to be able to keep 60 or 70% of the car they already have. So they might be able to take advantage of that, whereas Mercedes obviously cut their development very, very short on the 2020 car because it was so good. So we'll have to wait and see how that transpires. But as you mentioned, Courtney, yeah, the only criticism of Verstappen, I would argue, I wouldn't really focus too much on some of the stuff he was doing in practice, because it wasn't really affecting him in the race. Whilst I agree that is a legitimate concern, I feel Max just needs to, when he's in those opportunities, and they will become more often than they have done this season, to sort of take wins that you should be taking, he needs to make sure that he calculates those moves properly and make sure he doesn't try and go for too much too soon, because as we saw against Perez, that ultimately cost him that race in Turkey. We'll never know what happened if Max had completed that move in the final corner rather than spin off. So we're coming up to the final driver on our list. No prizes for guessing this one, but Courtney, I'm going to let you do the honors on this one, because this is your guy. This is your team.
So number one goes to soon to be Sir Lewis Hamilton. After so many years dominating, he's still finding a way to dominate Formula One in ways I didn't think was possible. He's beating record after record. Some would argue that this season's been a bit too easy for him, given the dominance of the car and Valtteri not being at his best. But he's just constantly finding ways to improve himself. We spoke about Kimi earlier on being 14, still finding ways to be strong. But Lewis is finding ways to improve, even when he looks at his personal life, with his diet, with the way that he trains. He's always trying to find ways to be a better driver, and he has no intention of giving up. You'd think after all this, he'd just, he'd be happy with that and move on.
Well, we'll be 36 in a couple of weeks, so it's certainly no mean feat at all.
So that's what I mean. He's finding ways. Like I thought, early 30s, he might just, he might start to tail off, but he's continuing. And he relishes the challenge. And, even looking into next season, he will, if Red Bull are close, he will relish that challenge, and it will make him a stronger driver. We saw it when Sebastian Vettel and Ferrari were competing. That gave them a new lease of life. And, we've spoken so much about Lewis. That's why I'm kind of struggling to, because we've said everything that needs to be said. I think he's incredible. I think he gets too much criticism. nobody's perfect, but I just think he gets attacked way too much for the dominance of the car. You know, he can only use what he's got in front of him, and he's doing a supreme job of it. Let's not understate what Lewis Hamilton has achieved these past few seasons, and he has taken a step up this season without a doubt.
Absolutely. It's been an excellent season from the world champion. Yep, number one on my list as well. I don't think you could look any further than Lewis Hamilton to be in the number one driver this season. It's 11 race wins, as many pole positions as well. Obviously, he missed that race in Sakir. He might have won that race. Obviously, if the race panned out the way that it did, he probably wouldn't have done, given the issues that George Russell had faced in his car. But I suppose it's probably not wrong in me suggesting that he faced tougher battles off the circuit than he did on it, and probably spent more time and energy, if you like, facing those larger societal issues, and rightly so. There's been a lot of big things happening this year. Getting rid of racism in the sport, being a figurehead, if you like, for the Black Lives Matter campaign, at least in Formula One, and some of the stuff that he stood for. Rightly so, Lewis should be focusing that as a big priority. And the challenges that have come from that, I would argue, have probably been more difficult to deal with than the current ones. And it just shows a testament of how good a driver Lewis Hamilton is, to be able to take all of that on and still be the role model, the character, the guy, the driving force for change, not just in Formula One, but in all walks of life as well. And the influence that he has had and the impact that he has had has been absolutely incredible and phenomenal. Stuff that I never thought I'd see in the sport. The crazy thing is you're not aware to these things. I think when we were growing up at the time, it never really battered to any of us of how undiverse, I think, is the lack of diversity existed in Formula One. And not necessarily
very much an elitist sport.
Yeah, it was, and not necessarily just because there were people that wanted a certain type of person driving cars or in the sport, although those characters did exist, and some cases do still today. But it's just because people weren't being made aware of it. And it's only until you see someone like Lewis Hamilton doing so well, and stuff that he says and stuff that he drives for change, you start to realize actually there is a fundamental problem, not just in Formula One, but in all walks of life, that we do need to address. And it's so great that people can bring that to our attention and say, we do need to be better. And, so that's another big achievement for Lewis this season, and something that he will continue to strive for, because clearly his work is not done, but he's still been able to find that drive for Formula One as well. I mean, performances, back to the racing, of course, the two memorable performances from Lewis this season, the Turkish Grand Prix in the wet, absolutely incredible performance from him. The way that the conditions changed and Lewis was able to make the most of the strategy calls and drive the right strategy for himself and really take onus on that, which saw him dominate that race. And then, of course, qualifying in Austria, where, it absolutely rained massively and he was 1.2 seconds faster than everybody else. That was incredible.
Mental.
It was literally Monaco Senna 1988 vibes right there. It was absolutely incredible lap. And I know people would say, oh, why didn't you pick that as your number one lap this season? Probably because of the shock factor and the fact that I wasn't as surprised that Lewis did that. Whereas I was massively surprised that Charles Leclerc put a dog of a Ferrari in P4 on a track that they were lucky to get into Q3, let alone do that. But Lewis proving on those occasions that not only is he statistically the best driver of all time, but certainly the best driver of his generation by far. I don't even think there's a comparison. I mean, Vettel, you could argue to some degree, but not in the same league as Lewis. And he was able to equal Schumacher's 7 world championships, get close to the century of poles, and also surpass the win record, which is incredible stuff. There aren't many records left that Lewis Hamilton doesn't already have. And I'm pretty sure he'll get the century for both race wins and pole positions. I mean, watching Lewis this season, Courtney, I think it's probably fair to, if you agree with me or not, I saw a merge of the strengths of Senna and the methodical, calculated approach of Prost merged into one driver in Lewis Hamilton, where he was blindingly quick, but he set the car up well. He managed the tyres fantastically, as I mentioned, in Portimao in particular. And that's something Lewis has not always been brilliant at. He's really had to work hard at that. You'd almost be forgiven for thinking it all comes naturally to Lewis, but there were certain elements to his driving when he was younger, particularly the tyres, that he really struggled with. But he's got that down to a T, probably one of the best tyre managers in Formula One today. And I can't really think of many moments where Lewis kind of messed up, but he wasn't faultless. I mean, there were errors. Austria, where he hit Albon, and cost him that podium, made the mistake passing the pit entry closed in Monza, which cost him
Monza, yeah.
there, and also making a very strange decision on where to do a practice start at the Russian Grand Prix, which was incredibly dangerous. I must say it wasn't Lewis's brightest moment, but other than those in particular, I can't really think much to say other than how brilliant Lewis has been this year. I mean, I would go some way and argue that this is potentially, from an all-round perspective, Lewis's strongest year in Formula 1.
100%. 100%.
And it's very easy to confuse that by the fact that he's had such a strong car, or the best car Formula 1 has ever seen in terms of pace. But you strip all that away and you look at the intricate details of Lewis's driving this year, and I can't think of many occasions or many seasons where Lewis has shown a stronger all-round game than he has this season. And that's probably explained why he's been so dominant.
So the thing is, I'm glad that you mentioned about the details of the race weekend that he's been improving on, because again, it's so easy to dismiss these things when you have the dominant car. It's still things like when you have the dominant car, it could be easy for Lewis. Like we saw a lot with Sebastian Vettel, Red Bull, he could slip away and it'd be like almost a minute clear. Lewis could probably do that based on raw pace, but he doesn't do that. And there's a reason for it, because he's looking after, he's nursing the tyres. Not only is he nursing the tyres, he's thinking further ahead in the season. I'm going to look after the engine, I'm going to look after the gearbox, I'm going to look after all these components, because they could come back to bite me if I don't look after the car properly. And there are things that he's learned, and he's definitely gone to a new level.
Yeah.
I agree with what you said earlier on. Probably been the best season of his career. And I just think it's going to be, no matter how good you are, it's going to be very difficult to beat this guy if Mercedes have a decent enough car next season.
Absolutely agree. And I'm pretty sure that they will do. It's going to be a mountain to climb for any driver, let alone the teammate that he's going to have next season. Valtteri Bottas will have something to do. But yeah, you're right to point that out. I mean, methodical is the word of the episode. I've used that quite a lot in this one to describe particularly Lewis. I say that with Lewis Hamilton because, as you mentioned with Sebastian Vettel, when things haven't gone well for him, it's been always hard for him to recover. In Lewis's case, when he's so quick, he's leading from the front. But in races when he's not been leading from the front, particularly this season, as I said, Bottas beat him 5 times in qualifying. Lewis has always been able to find a way not to panic, manage the situation, and then execute that strategy perfectly to get himself in front. There have been some cases where he's had the opportunity to do that with a safety car or something, but then there have been other occasions where Lewis has been able to take stock of the situation and say, okay, we're not leading right now, but this is the plan. And then he executes that more often than not. And that's the sort of skill that all the elite drivers need to have in Formula One history. I said Prost was a master at that sort of thing. And Lewis Hamilton is proven to do that as well. It's why he's consistently scored so many points in consecutive races. It's that, that's another record that he's probably going to beat at some point soon. So I can't say enough superlatives about Lewis Hamilton. Easily been the driver of this season and definitely the man to beat next season. There's no doubt in my mind if he stays on at Mercedes, and it's a big if he does. I'd be very surprised if he didn't. I would expect him to not only complete the century of poles and race wins, but also get that 8th World Championship, which clearly no one else has ever done. And given the direction that Formula One is going, assuming we have the desired results, we may never see again. So let's embrace it while we can.
Yeah, couldn't put it any better, Adam. The guy is just. I think he is a legend. I think it's time for even the haters to accept that the man is a sporting legend.
Yeah.
And I just think he probably doesn't have many years left in Formula One. And instead of knocking the guy, let's just appreciate that you're watching a legend at work. And hopefully one day he gets the respect that he deserves from the general public.
Absolutely agree. Well, that's our top 10 list, guys. Obviously, we've been going on for a little over an hour now, but let us know what you think, guys. Who is in your top 10 list? We're going to put it in the description below so you can see our top 10 list side by side and let us know who you think should be in that top 10 if you agree with our list, or if there's any names that we missed out in particular. But until then, guys, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Our target for next year is to try and get to 1,000 subscribers, and the only way we can do that is through your continued support. So if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you do, and of course share this with anyone you know that might be interested, and also follow us on social media handles as well. So until then, all that's left to say is thank you, Courtney, for co-hosting this episode with me once again.
Love doing it, mate.
And thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe, and we'll see you in the next episode of the DNF1 F1 podcast.
See you soon.